Give me a one-word summary of Ali Imsarovich's apology video.
Great question.
Fedor Holz, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I was talking to a young pro the other day, and we were kind of looking at his life and different things he's trying to get better at. And one thing he said was he doesn't manage his days terribly well as far as allocating his time. And when he brought that up, he said, you would be a very good resource, that you're someone he knows really, is very intentional in terms of planning your days. I wanted to hear about that some.
I think people are way overhyped how good I am at planning my days. I think the balance I kind of found was to just, it will sound silly, but to just really try to minimize the things I don't really want to do. Mm-hmm. And that is hard. Like, it sounds easy, but I found it very hard for myself. And I think the struggle is often to just try to do too many things and to try to take on too many challenges and to not, like, what I found with myself is that I didn't give the things credit. That, like, sometimes a really small step is a very challenging, it can be very challenging. Like, sometimes to just, regularly go outside, or like, there was this voice in my head that you should be able to do these things by now. You should, you're 30, like, you should have, how hard can it be to do this and to, like, just kind of general good living? And I think once I started to accept more as like, hey, no, I have to just, start at 1, then go to 2, then to 3, then, like, just slowly build out these things and, like, do less of the things that are not so good for me. And then also be okay if, like, then sometimes I fall back and I get into a bad rhythm again. And so I would say it's just been, like, kind of a step-by-step process over the last 10 years or so. Yeah, not something magical, really.
What's an example of something that you don't really want to do, but you'd found yourself doing for a long time until examining it?
I would say the very typical things, like anything that would be put in the wasting time category. So, like, watching TV series, but also unhealthy habits around not drinking enough, not moving enough, not getting enough sunlight, not cooking enough at home, or eating irregular, or things not necessarily what other people think, but just more sometimes I eat things where at the moment I eat them, I feel like I know it's not good for me, but I still eat them.
Yep.
And that's also something just in this experience where, like, I'm doing something that's harmful for me. And it's just a weird experience with myself where I'm like, what? God, I'm at a stage where then I'm doing it and I'm like, why am I doing this right now? This just feels weird. And then to not be too hard on myself and beat myself up like that. I just ate, like, for example, milk products. Like, sometimes I just really like the taste of cheese, but, like, I just get sick. I just feel bad afterwards. And that's one thing where, like, I do this, multiple, like, dozens of times a year. And I'm just like, alcohol is the same thing, right? I regularly drink. So, like, maybe once a week, or sometimes more, sometimes less. And then I'd say I went from mostly feeling like, oh, I should have, drank less, to, like, now being mostly feeling like it's okay. But then there's still these moments where I'm like, I didn't need this, or, like, I should. So it's like very small example, like lots of very small things where I feel like that's it. Like, I don't need much more. Like, if I eat healthy, and if I go outside, and if I go into nature, and if I move enough, and if I spend time with my girlfriend and some friends, and if I work on things I'm excited about, like, if that is kind of in place, I'm having incredible days.
Makes sense. So how do you, one thing I think about a lot when you hear high stakes tournament players talking about what they can get better at off the felt, there's, this big culture of optimization, and, everything seems kind of colored by that. And it almost feels like there's maybe not a backlash, but, what you're talking about there, it doesn't sound in opposition to optimization, but it sounds a little bit more amorphous, not as clearly linear, point A to point B, do this to, prevent jet lag. And the question that comes to mind for me a lot is, I'm always thinking, how do I know if I'm enjoying something or if I'm just comfortable with something? I'm used to this, as opposed to, like, take weed or alcohol is an easy example, watching television, as you mentioned, sugar. How much is this something that actually is making me happy versus I'm leaning into it for comfort, kind of like a nervous tick, like, cracking my knuckles. It would be weird to say I like doing it. It's something I do, and it clearly originated from some sort of anxiety. How do you kind of make sense of all that? What do you actually enjoy versus what's comfortable?
I mean, that's a great question. Maybe to the point you said before, I was on that optimization route, like heavily. I had multiple people working for me. I had my blood tested quarterly. I did basically any type of measurement you could do. I had like technical stuff customized for me. I had a full-time sports scientist traveling with me and working for me. Like I basically like everything you could imagine. The downfall, I would say, for me was the experience was pretty, like, it wasn't great. It was mostly, I think the realization was mostly, you do all this scientific study to then figure out you just got to do the basics right, basically, which was a bit, it was like, yeah, you just got to do this, and it's basically sleep well, move healthily, and eat well, and you're healthy. Ta-da! Like, and then I was like, the struggle was really how much forced effort I had to put into maintaining a lot of these things, and that it was more like an external design that was put on me. Like I could come up with a design and then I had to kind of force it onto me. And I think any type of like any process that resembles that, where you just like, you have to bring up that force from somewhere. And I feel like that's kind of life force. You just then kind of channel into something where it's then forcing you, and you just not, it's not a net positive. And that's, I think, my segue into the answer of your question. I feel that there's a really strong internal sensory for net benefits or net positives. And I feel that there is a natural attraction to those. And then I think there is also noise and distractors, and they can run for a pretty long time, but I think not forever. And I think there's always an underlying clarity where, yes, maybe sometimes the noise is very loud for a very long time, alcohol, sugar, but there's always like these moments where like, I think there's like, no, actually no. And I think it feels a bit like sometimes the noise gets less and then you have more reflection, and then it gets louder and you have less reflect. But like, I feel, if I look at my progression, that like over a few decades, like it's just becoming less and less, and the things I enjoy become more and more. So I think there's some kind of internal sensory for that net benefit, whatever that might mean.
It makes a lot of sense. When you mentioned the clarifying moment, like originally my brain kind of jumps to, well, the clarifying moment with alcohol is when you're hungover the next day and you're being punished and you're like, whoa, clearly the cost benefit I made last night was off. Or with sugar, you, I don't know, eat ice cream sundae and find your ass on the toilet or whatever it is. The pushback is like, well, but no, you did enjoy that ice cream sundae in the moment, and you might have had a great time with alcohol. And the middle ground is like, maybe you can't judge alcohol by when you're, messed up and having a good time with buddies, but you also maybe shouldn't judge it by the hangover. And there's like some stasis, some period, like 2 days later, where you're like, that's the clarity center where, you've got a little bit of both, kind of in your memory. I don't know. I always think about that, especially when it comes to goal making. We both coach a lot of poker, or have over the years. And, one thing you deal with anyone coming to a coach is people trying to, their goals are often a little bit loftier than their work is really going to reflect. And so, but those goals are manufactured out of whether it's a New Year's resolution or a caffeine hype or whatever, but it's some optimistic moment that, I don't think is necessarily the best for goal setting. But at the same time, you don't want to make your goals while you're depressed or in some terrible mood. Finding that middle ground, I think, is really tricky.
Or maybe don't really set goals. And I mean, I set a lot of goals in my life, and especially in my early days. And I think that with goals, it is this, I now use it a bit more as intentions. I think that I used to have, it's hard for me to explain, but I used to have this idea around goals where they are much more, you visualize a reality, and anything that happens is being judged against that very flat 2D reality that you visualize. So it's like, where it's basically like a number or
it's not holistic. It's just super zoomed in, is what you're saying, right?
Yes, but also where there's a lot of value in that. But the way I used to approach that was, it's become so all encumbering, where it's basically anything has to now be compared to that, rather than just keeping it as a strong thought. Where it's like, okay, when I put all my mental energy into trying to visualize something in the future, and then I try to really dive deep into how does that feel? How do I feel in it? Like, is that the strongest sense of fulfillment I could envision in that area or in that? And then if I just start to build that vision and that, how does that feel? What am I doing there? How am I spending my time? Who am I doing that with? I see that more as like, when it progresses now, I see it more as interesting what I thought back then about that time.
Mm-hmm.
And very often now it's more an experience of, the goal doesn't really matter that much. Like this, okay, where am I now, and what was the goal? It doesn't matter so much. It's more like, I'm like, oh wow, interesting. Why did I think, this would happen, or this would be great, or this, and so then it becomes more of like a start to reflect more and become better at visualizing futures and feeling into them and sharpening, and like, rather than like, there's no real disappointment in it. It's just kind of like a visualization, and then and then it kind of happens, and then there's this interesting what I visualized back then. But there's not so much this like, oh, I'm failing, where it's like I'm not fast enough, or like I didn't do this, or I have to do that. I think that just drastically changed. There's almost nothing along those lines for me, and I feel like this has, since I don't do that much more, I feel like these visualizations, and maybe then it's weird when people talk about goals and I talk about goals and I talk about something totally different. Sure. But like this really strong visualizing and really strong intention setting, I spend a lot of time on that, and that's massive for me. Like when I start a project, I do this very, very intensively.
I think that pretty much has almost only benefits and no drawbacks compared to the goal. The way you phrase it, I like it a lot. And yet I think it's way more difficult to execute. I think that people crave this pro-con list, check mark or no check mark. It's just so satisfying, as a person, to just be like, good, that task is done. Or I did my 15,000 steps for the day. I said I was going to go to the gym 3 days a week, but it puts so much pressure on making a really good goal. Like, say your goal is to get in better shape, and you say, rather intuitive, I'll go to the gym 3 days a week. But like, you go to the gym and do nothing. You could go to the gym for 10 minutes. Now you have to say how long you go. Now you have to say how hard you work out. You have to get more and more detailed, because most goals, they lack the nuance. And you could go to the gym 3 days a week and be a less healthy person. Whereas what you're saying, you know what you want. You want to get in better shape. But it's so, without that like very firm structure, it feels like it takes a lot more constant reminder and really knowing what you're after. And then you have to fight those battles, like, because now you haven't really restricted yourself to, you have to go to the gym 3 days a week. You really have to have more discipline and more kind of self-awareness, I think, on a daily basis. But I love it.
But then also less discipline. And I think that's the great thing, because I think actual goals require much more discipline. Like if I look at people around me, I feel like I'm one of the least disciplined people among them. And when I talk to people, very often one of the words they say about me is, I'm so disciplined, but like I'm the absolute opposite. Like I consider discipline as forcing yourself to do something. Mm-hmm. Someone who's just able to like basically turn all things down and just be like, no, I'm not thinking right now. I'm just executing this thing because that's it now. That's what I wrote down. Like I'm just programming myself to this thing. And when that's 5 times a week gym, or when then I just do that. And I think there's a certain quality to that. I think it's a very helpful tool in certain situations, but I don't think it's a good way to live your life. I think when you practice that too much, when you apply it to too many things in your life, you just become very dull. Because when you tune that off, when you just focus on just execution, you have to tune something off. And the things you're tuning off, like that's a very, very big part of the colorfulness and the richness of life. And I think that's like, to be able to say that, like when there's this thing at hand and you feel like, okay, you have to survive, like this is the thing you got to do now, and you can do that for certain periods of time, that's great. But that's, I think what I've learned is like, I think my philosophy since I've been a kid basically has always been, I want to find ways where I'm just tapping into that natural energetic resource that I have as much as possible, so that things just feel effortless. That I sit there for 10 hours and I've never set out to do it, and I never thought I have to do it, and then it's just like, this is the thing I want to do. That's always been my fuel.
I think adjusting yourself to where you can recognize those benefits without them being so like, okay, I think about a lot of poker players have a video game background. You ever play role-playing games?
Yeah.
It's so satisfying. You go up a level. How do you want to, you know, put your points? You want to be more powerful? Do you want to have better magic, better defense or whatever? And it's like, great. I just upped my ICM game by 10%. I just lowered my body fat percentage by 2%, whatever. And it's so satisfying to just be able to point to something. I have a friend who recently, he lost a bunch of weight. He looks great. And I asked him how much he lost. And I was so proud more than anything when he said, I don't know. I never weighed myself. It's like, wow, what a beast. That's great. Like, it's obviously not about a number. It's about getting in better shape. But I think it's so satisfying to be able to say 36 pounds, you know?
Yeah. Congrats to your friend.
Yeah. I was impressed. So when I think of Fedor Holz, one thing I think of is you're kind of, in my head anyway, you mark this transition from the old school German high roller regs. You know, you've got Igor Kurganov, Tobias Rankemeyer, Fabian Quoss, Philippe Grissom, and then you've got the new school guys, and there's plenty of them now, many of who, you know, came up under your tutelage or studying along with you. What's your relationship with the old school guys? Did they help you at all on your way up? Are you friendly with any of them now? And do you know, or have a theory about why we don't see those guys anymore?
I mean, I do have a theory because they're old. But no, I think my personal relationship with them has been pretty great. I have a great experience from my first high roller that I played, which was a 7K high roller in, I believe, St. Martin. And WPT, and this was my first. It's silly because I think I played a 5K before, but then now this 7K was called high roller, so it just felt it had a different vibe to it, and it was basically Philip, Fabian, Igor, Tobias, and me, and an American reg. And that was interesting because I came to battle. You know, I was there and I was like, okay, I just want to play this to battle. And I think that marked our relationship as well, where I think they saw something, I think, as well, that it just came with a different hunger than they were very far in their career already. They were quite accomplished, lots of success online, playing all these high rollers for a few years already and doing well. So it was just a different stage. And I can feel this now today, how you feel when you're, 10 years into your career and when you've done a lot of things. It's just very hard to be, in the grind, learning and getting better 10 years in a row plus. I think you have your phases in your career and in your life. And so our relationship has been pretty good. And I think with Fabian, I'm probably the closest, but I've been good with all of them. And it was a bit more like, I wouldn't say father son, but a bit like uncle,
big brother.
Yeah, no, I mean, never super friendly because super best friends because we were also competing and playing against each other, but also friendly because I had no reason to, I wasn't like, oh, you guys suck. I was more like, hey, I was excited to play against them, but I also came to battle. So it was a great relationship, I would say. And they weren't too ego about it. They were, I think in the beginning, obviously they're like, we're the guys here. Yeah. But after some time, it felt like they respected me and they acknowledged me as a good player. And I think that's always, I think, a good foundation for a good relationship. And I also respected them. I didn't feel like, oh, these guys are shit. Like, I always had respect for them, I think, on just everything they've accomplished, and they're great guys outside of poker as well. So it was just a pretty smooth thing. And then in terms of transitioning, like I think they went out of poker kind of at the same time, like 2-3 years after I started playing high rollers, or like basically the year overlapping, like 2015, 2016, they stopped playing, basically all of them. So I just played with them in the same tournaments for a year, maybe 1.5, max 2 years. And then they didn't really play anymore. So they mostly focused on crypto, moved somewhere else, did other things. And yeah, that was it.
How difficult, take, without naming a name, let's say whoever you believe is the median talent and, studious of that group. How long before, if at all, do you think they would be able to, let's say, be a top 25 player in a Triton 50K if they were taking it seriously?
It is very difficult with these if they take it seriously.
Let's say they're putting 30 hours a week into it.
Yeah. Maybe 1.5 years.
Wow. No. Gotcha.
It's basically the play style from 2000. I mean, I know their games pretty well because I've analyzed it a lot. So the play style from like 2014, and they were playing a little bit earlier, maybe even where like their pinnacle was maybe, between 210 and 214, 15. And I mean, Niklas is a bit of a different beast because he also played high six cash and was always a bit of a different. So it's like his game I know much less because I also didn't play tournaments against him. But the other
that was who?
Niklas Heinecker.
Okay.
Who was also part of this group, but he was also always a bit of an enigma.
Sure.
Just a different, like I think it's just his brain is just wired in a different way. But the others I have a pretty good sense for, and the thing is really like the game was so different. You just have like certain things might even be negative, where it's not good to have these automatisms. What's really helpful is if you have a sit and go background, like those things, this information, definitely that's my biggest upside, is that I have a lot of short stack study done, because your 0 to 15 big blind study is very, very helpful and still quite up to date. So if you've done 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 hours on sit and goes and short stack play, I think that's a really, really big edge compared to someone starting new right now. Mm-hmm. But in terms of your general game plan, was not very good in 2012
Sure.
or 13. Like,
yeah,
it's hard.
A lot of unknowns back then, solving on the fly.
Basically, all my students right now are sharper than me in a lot of ways. Like, mm-hmm. It's just when you kind of grow up with this, right? It's like just when you also the ideas that it's much harder to have an idea that then maybe turns out is like actually rather misleading, and then you have like sometimes certain things build on each other, and sometimes you just go and then you're like, no, you have to unlearn this, because I didn't know that I was exploiting certain things. I just kind of, like, when I was playing too loose in certain spots, I didn't know that the reason why, like, I realized it's winning and it's crushing, but I didn't know that it's because, people don't do this and that. And then suddenly from playing 95% by volume, just playing like way too aggro in a lot of spots, to then realize like, oh, this is only because, he overfolds in this spot, or like he under defends there because he doesn't 3-bet there, because he doesn't flat the button, and then suddenly you're like, to realize that and to later then be like, oh, like adjust your game style and it's a ton of work. It was a ton of work for me. And I think I would struggle with similar things in some ways, where you just have your mind is just set up in a certain way. So I'd say it's a struggle.
Yeah, I think what you said at the end, it's so difficult to rewire when you've had such positive feedback for stuff that's not going to work today. It kind of calcifies and you're just like, this is a great play. I don't care what solver bots say. I just know this works. And it does in 2016. And then it gets you hammered in 2024. And there's always going to be a couple of those types of plays that were your bread and butter. And they're no longer like winning less money. They're like the most harmful thing you could have in your game.
And one thing I want to add there, this is not because I think they wouldn't make progress. They would make insane progress, but it's because I think the top 25 are, I mean, maybe 1.5. I think even now thinking a bit more about it, 1.5 years is probably an unrealistic time frame. I think the top 25 in a 50K are very, very good poker players. And I think basically all of them will continue to, like, there's maybe 2 or 3 dropping out that will study less. And then there's like the 26th to the 28th best, who are most likely just going to put in more than 30 hours. So it would basically mean you start from a lower point and you would have to work very, very effectively and then kind of like overtake other people who are also working. So actually I would probably say you need to dedicate your life to it, and then you have a good shot at it in like, you know, in 2.5 years. Because that's kind of what I do with my students as well. As I think that they start at like, I took them in maybe at like, you know, $100 buy-in, average buy-in or something like this. And I think from that point, if you like, you know, full dedication, 60 hours a week, nothing else in your life, just poker, to be like hopefully a winning player in a Triton 50K probably takes you another 2 to 3 years from there. So it's like, it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point. Time doesn't freeze for everyone else. I have some more casual students who, you know, maybe do 10 hours a year with me, and it's like, you can see the progress, and they're like, I'm night and day better than I was 3 years ago, but everyone else got better too. Like, you know, and especially the players who are worse than you, they're going to progress quicker. Of course, there's just more to learn. So what about the younger German players? There's, you know, a lot of them. I couldn't name everybody, you know. I just met Tom Fuchs. Is that how you say his last name?
Fuchs.
Leon Sturm has been playing a lot. Sorry, I interrupted. How do you say Tom's last name?
Fuchs.
Fuchs. I'm never going to say them Fox, right.
Actually.
Fox. I can say Fox.
Yeah, it's
oh, it means Fox.
Yeah. It's like Fuchs is fox in German. So nice. you can call him Tom Fox.
All right. Nice guy. Picked up Spike quickly. Tobias, who there's no way I can say his last name. You've shown me multiple times. I don't come close. Hit us. What's Tobias? Yeah, I'm drawing dead on that. All right. But, you know, you tell me some of the other guys, some of the guys who are, let's say, your age or younger. That'll qualify as younger.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is it's quite fragmented, right? And I'm not, I mean, I'm nowhere near an instrumental figure in all this, you know. It's not like that I'm orchestrating all of this and then I'm like, all these guys play under me. Like, it's not even close. Like, basically I have a group, a very small group that I work with, and it's basically, it was more like a passion project, I would call it. So I call it Soon, and it's 10 players that I took in. So I started with 6, and it was really more like based on heart and less on brain. You know, it wasn't, I actually didn't pick, you know, I didn't pick like the ones that were making the most money or like had the biggest win. It was more like I met a few young guys. One of them is Samuel Mullur. You probably saw him the last Triton stop. And
Sam won, what was it? The one in the Bahamas?
The 25K GG Millions in the Bahamas.
GG Million, yeah, that was huge. How much? Like 3 mil?
2.7 million.
Nice.
Yeah. And basically it was really more like I almost did no poker coaching. And we worked for 18 months now, and I did maybe, you know, a few hours, like 10, 20 hours or whatever. But it's mostly just on their career and their lives and like how to set up certain things. And like, obviously there's a lot of engagement, there's a lot of talking, but it's so interesting to see just how much value there is. And just because they're fire for poker, you know, they're so passionate about poker, but it's really like so many things that for me are obvious and for them are not. And then it's just really kind of giving them input and pointing them in the right direction and putting the right people together and like giving them the right resources and giving them the right people to work with. And then suddenly you have this melting pot of just a lot of great things happening. And that's just really exciting. So that's my group. And Mario Mosböck is part of it. Roland Rokita, who also just won a tournament in Triton. And they're not part of those guys, but they're part of like kind of my poker group. And I took them into the the younger guys into the Discord base. So I had like my little group of friends that we do some work with, and then I took in those young guys, and that's the Zoom group. And so there's 10 of them now, and you've met 2 of them, I think, and Tom and Samu. And then there's a variety of different other German pros that come out of different, there's different groups and like different people that work together. Tobias is someone I know for a long time, so that's where our relationship comes from. It's really more, I mean, basically, he was my first staker, actually.
Wow.
And this is 2012, so I was playing 180 mans, and I think he staked me back then. So it was like, he's a long time pro, and he's very, just pretty smart, like genuinely smart guy, and just a nice dude. And then there's Leon, who's I think a bit of a he's part of everything in some way as well. Like he's a very social and light guy, but then he's also a bit kind of his own guy. Mm-hmm. Very young, like very, very sharp, like just plays, I think, pretty well. And I think he's just a very, very big talent. Like you can tell that just a lot of, I mean, he's extremely young, and I'm pretty sure in the next few years he's going to turn from a great into an exceptional player. Mm-hmm. And then there's maybe 10 others that play Tritons and play high rollers. Probably there's even more, but there's like quite a lot of Ole Chemion, like old school guy. There's Grozorg. I mean, there's basically the Wattenlos crew, Chris Rudolph. So there's a bunch of guys there who occasionally also play Tritons or other high rollers. So like there's different crews. I mean, it's when I'd say there's a few gems really in there. Like also Austria, like generally in every culture though, I feel like if I look at the poker cultures, like there's really a few people just incredible in terms of, like how ethical they are, how trustworthy they are, like just also how their brains work, there's just some really great people in the poker community in general, I think.
Yeah. And of course, opportunity wise, I mean, you guys seem to grow up with really good English. So it just, I get to understand you and vice versa, where like, VBV, I would love to hang out with him, but I can't understand very much, and he doesn't.
Yeah, he's funny.
He's probably the funniest guy on Triton, and he barely knows English, but we just all know he's hilarious.
Yeah, that's right.
You ready for a round of the game?
Sure.
Excellent. All right. Fedor knows what I'm talking about. Audience at home. This is a game Nick Petrangelo showed me a couple years ago, which is ironic. I've got a deck of cards here. It's ironic because Nick hates games, which is strange for a poker player, but he's a bit of an outlier there. And it's like a ranking game. So I'm going to pick a card. By the way, I can't shuffle, so you guys can see this is a guy who can't riffle a deck.
You can't riffle a deck?
Can't riffle a deck. It's embarrassing.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. We got it?
You're good. Yes, I got it. You're good at every sport in the history of sports, and you can't shuffle a deck. That's
I have no skills with chips or with cards. Nothing. All right. So Fedor and audience who unfortunately can't play along, the card. 2 is low, ace is high. I'm going to ask Fedor 2 subjective questions, and it's a cooperative game. So his answers will hopefully guide me to the correct card. If we're off by 1, it's a draw. If we hit it, we win, and off by more than 1's a loss. So Fedor, question number 1. You are staying on the strip for WSOP the whole summer. We're going to count the Rio and the Palms and, Virgin as part of the strip, but this is the hotel where you will be staying for WSOP. So essentially, I don't know the card. You guys do. If it was a 2, Fedor would answer the least desirable place for him to stay. If it was an ace, it would be the most desirable place. An 8 is the middle. Take your time.
The Rio.
The Rio. All right. Fedor's at the Rio. What was that disease people were catching a few years ago at the Rio? Question number 2. You're making a law for the entire world to make the world a better place. It's just a law It's not a law of physics. Every country will do its best to enforce and have people abide by the law. Here's a caveat. 2 is not going to make the world a worse place. 2 is just barely going to make the world a better place, like very close to neutral, close to inconsequential. Ace is whatever you think would have the most beneficial impact to the world. And you've got plenty of time because we're just going to jump cut to your answer. So
smart. You know the airport security?
Yeah.
The laws around taking your shoes off and I think there's certain laws around like the scanner and taking like in America that you have to take your shoes off and
Sure.
And around the water bottles that is being lifted.
All right, that's lifted. So not a fan of the Patriot Act. Probably a better place. I'm a little worried about the water bottles, the liquid. I'm not as sure. The shoes, I feel good. It was one guy with bombs in his shoes. We'll run it. We're in 2-3 zone for sure. The Rio's pretty fucking terrible. I'm hoping you remembered Circus. That feels like my 2. There's about 13 options. So we've got Stratosphere. They remodeled. I don't think that could be the bottom, but it's up there towards the north where I don't know if you've been there. It's kind of dangerous. 3. We're going with a 3.
It was a 4.
Oh, we're right there. All right. We're playing another round later. All right. Moving on.
I mean, I really felt like, the sewers were the 2 for me.
The sewers? I said a hotel.
No, I mean, like the Rios, right? No, I was actually thinking, I've never been at the Stratosphere, but I had this as the worst.
Okay.
I've heard
it was probably for a moment. I went to a show there a couple years ago, and it's just like, it's clean now. It's like there was whatever. I mean, it's not going to be nice, but in the neighborhood, I think is the worst. I think like when you get outside of there, you're pretty close to getting shot. So we have a hand of yours that you played in 2022. Do you remember the Ace-7, you versus Kevin Pock? You had 8-6.
Yes, I think.
All right.
I think I do.
Nice. Can we break it down?
Let's do it.
Excellent. All right. So setting the stage here, we've got Makita's got 51 bigs. Kevin Pock has 38. Danny Tang 34. You've got 20 big blinds, and Sir Watts has 19. So you raise it up on the button, Ace-7-0, 2 bigs, and Kevin defends with 8-6. First question, Kevin's covering you. 8-6, offsuit, not a super common big blind defend at final tables. Is this a product of him covering you? If the stacks are reversed, do you find yourself folding 8-6?
Let's say neglecting who the opponent is, probably very close, but probably fine. Mm-hmm. Like I think 6-8, probably fine, and 5-8 fold. If you face an opponent where it's more likely you face more aggression than he's allowed to, probably you can fold. Because that's a really important factor, is like the button should, you will have leads from the big blind. The button should play a bit more polarized, a bit more passive and with some medium strong hands, and that helps you realize more equity with holdings like this. And a lot of people have very varying strategies in this spot, so it's very important from an exploitative standpoint, where we're not really sure what the theoretically optimal approach is here. I put a lot of emphasis on whether I think people will show too much or too little aggression here, because that helps us realize equity quite a lot.
When you mentioned the leads, is that a product of you being very high card heavy relative to a normal chips button range, and so he has these low boards to attack, or is that regardless of who has the stack leverage?
It's not really so high card dependent. Obviously then kind of the board, depending on the structure, or like as a result of the structure of the ranges, you will see certain board types where it's hard for in position to defend thin, right? Because if let's say we look at board structures where, for example, you're forced to hit the correct defending frequency, you're forced to take a lot of hands that are marginal defenses because you don't have enough strong hands to pull from. So non-ace X boards, for example, right? If we look at low connected boards, if we look at 3-5-7 or 4-5-6 or 4-5-7, 5-6-8 boards like this, you will see quite a lot of leads from the big blind just because you deny a lot of equity. There's just the EV drops in my position for a lot of these 2 overcard defense, and there's also more. You also have more 1-pair hands. You get raised significantly less than in chip EV scenarios. So it's like a bit more generally that big blind has more equity that he wants to deny, both with medium strong hands, but also obviously weak hands that are happy to fold out stronger hands. So it's like kind of a dynamic where button just wants to check a lot, and when button just really wants to check a lot, you generally, I mean, that's kind of result. Big blind tends to lead more.
Makes sense. So we get the queen 6-4, looking at SPR a little bit sub 4, 3.5. First question, are you playing a range bet, or are we finding some checks on the queen 6-4?
I mean, I'm with the stack distribution, I'm fairly certain you should not range bet this board. Like it depends a bit how I'm opening here. I'm probably opening slightly wider than I'm supposed to, so that's a starting point I have to take into consideration when I think about the flop. How much did Danny Tang have in the small blind? He was also around deeper, right?
We said 32 bigs. It's you and Watts have a clear difference from the field.
Yeah. So I was assuming that I don't see the aggression that I think they should show, both small blind and big blind. So hence I can open slightly wider, which adapts my strategy on the flop. If I take that into consideration, I will not play 100% c-bet strategy. But even then, I don't think this is a board we want to c-bet pure. ICM implications are quite relevant here in terms of the distribution of the stack. So you will have a high c-bet percentage for a small-ish sizing, but I could definitely see it not being 100. It might just be 75, 80 or so.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think a lot of those say bet 75 to 85% of your range spots can be the most difficult for players, because it's like sometimes I'll often tell people if you're 85 or above, just round to 100, because you're not going to balance your C bets properly. You're going to lean into the ones that you know, you can see jacks here, you can see an ace jack, but maybe you don't balance and, I don't know, you just have a habit where people know how you like to play your sevens in this spot and you never check a queen, for example. I think it's really, really tough when you're supposed to bet 80% of your range and you're playing against the same opponents day in, day out.
That's right. But I think even for a hand like Queen 9, I don't think you're incentivized enough to c-bet.
Sure.
So like I would say that I generally, for a very simplistic point of view, I often think that you develop a certain type of intuition, and I often give the advice, like in these spots, just try to think of the incentives of certain hand types. And I think the most obvious one is always the under pair under the highest card. So like pocket jacks is kind of always the hand that will fill up the checking range as much as possible, just because it obviously it doesn't block a top pair, and it doesn't want to get check raised, and it performs extremely well in a 2-bet game. So
sure. Maximally protected for something that doesn't want to go 3.
Exactly. So it's like that's the hand that basically will always come up. But I also would argue that in certain other spots where you go for chips, where Queen 9 is just you have a range advantage, you just want to get more chips in the middle. I would say that is less the case now. You're much less inclined to bring in all your chips with Queen 9 in this particular spot.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd already say if you have Queen 5 suited, or even like Queen 9 off, or Queen 8 or Queen 7, like there's just a really, really decent enough incentive to check candidates like that. And then jacks and tens, I think, very straightforward. But then also like ace high hands, right? Like ace jack, ace 10 type of hands, like pretty decent incentive to check. So I think it's fairly intuitive to build your checking range here, where you have certain value hands that are totally fine to play 1 or 2 streets, and then you have certain hands that just want to get to showdown, and one protects the other. So I think that yes, it's not easy to build, but I think it's quite intuitive what hands to pull from.
Makes sense. I think, when you say the incentives game, that makes me thinking that we're just not, most of us, calibrated naturally to ICM, because ICM is not one-off. It's very dynamic, and you're seeing a different situation every time. But chips is much easier. So when you're playing 20 big blinds, button versus big blind for chips, it's still extremely complex, but you have this feeling like queen 9 is enough. One kind of barometer I like to think of is a starting place is kind of 1.5x your stack, and say, am I happy getting that much in for chips? And it's not perfect, but it's an imperfect start to trying to recognize what your hand strength and how your incentives kind of balance.
I think a very important part is, do you beat value? Like, do you beat value? If for example, he raises, do you beat value? I think that's a very, very important part of this aspect, because if you bet the worst of the best, basically, and then you are basically right in between his value hands and his bluffs, that's generally the cutoff where you want to start checking.
And when you're playing, strong player versus strong player for chips at 20, they're defending hands like queen 2 off, and they're not defending, I don't know what he would do with king queen here, but they're lacking for more of the stronger hands. The higher queen jack's probably not as much in the defend, but for 20 for ICM, pretty natural defend, you'd say?
Yeah,
Seems close. Fair enough.
Yeah, I think he doesn't, but it must be fairly close. I mean, yeah. Queen jack off and queen 10 off you defend, but like queen 10 suited, I think is just an all-in.
But queen 9 being an example of the hand that matches up entirely differently for chips as opposed to ICM, even ignoring the fact that, hey, your chips are worth more and you don't want to bust, you're just going up against a different range. So how valuable it is, even if busting wasn't a problem. Kevin's going to check it over to you, and you do go for the c-bet. What size do we see? 2 1/4, so 1/3. Do you think? Kevin with a quick call. Do you think that you were going to play one size in the situation?
It's probably not the perfect sizing, to be fair. Like, if I would play it right now, I'd probably size down a little bit. Like, I mean, in game, generally, I think. I'm always pondering, like, certain things are quite practical things against certain players. Like, I think you just reduce check raising percentage by slightly more than it should be. I think people just have this natural inclination that against too small sizes, for some reason, they just feel like check raising more because it's just a cheaper price, but more than it's actually being done more. So I think in this type of spot where I feel like probably a smaller sizing is maybe slightly better, but not too much smaller. So this is very much technicalities, but I think probably 175 or 200 is also just
nice.
Just fine.
So Kevin's got an interesting spot. I thought this was maybe the most interesting part of the hand, is both playing donks on the turn and how you respond to that. So I was curious to hear how you would handle Kevin's situation, and then how your range might respond. As we're going to see, he leads for, looks like B20.
Yeah.
200. Yeah, a little bit less.
I think that is actually fairly smart. Like, lots of hands, probably also, it's not only a thing that happens quite often in theory here, because you do have quite a lot of hands that benefit from that type of protection, like 4x and 6x, but also now 5x that has improved to a pair. hands like 5-7, 6-7, 6-8, 4x, or just 3-4, 4-7, or even just a hand like ace-6, and also queen x that can lead for this. So there's a fair large amount of hands that benefits from that. And the main thing here is also mostly putting my equity that is in that region between like 20 and 40% equity to make life for this one hard. Or let's say, I mean, against range, yeah, maybe it's even 15 to 35% equity. So basically, it's designed against hands like King Jack, King 10, Jack 10, where I still have equity against hands that he does this with, but you want to charge those type of hands like Ace King or Ace 8 or something like that. So there's a fair bit of hands that want to do that from his perspective. Since one thing I also like in terms of concepts for this is, I would always say, when you're the aggressor, you generally have a stronger, like when you open and big blind defense, you generally have a stronger range. But when you see that, you kind of take advantage of that range advantage, and then that's kind of the extraction of that. But what happens then is the big blind is then sorting his range to the board, and you haven't really, you do it a little bit, but you haven't as much as he did. You just basically have extracted your pre-flop advantage, and then he's sorting, he's defending, he's giving some of that EV back, and then he's defending, and now defending towards the board. So cards that improve towards the board are generally better for the big blind, and especially in spots where now it improves the board, or cards that connect to the board, and I'm in a spot where I'm less inclined to put chips in. So I think this is a combination of factors where lead on turn for small size, I think
that's great.
Makes sense.
Let me ask you about his bottom a little bit, because, with some of your more borderline hands, let's say Ace King, as you mentioned, but, you probably got, what am I looking at here? Maybe Ace of Clubs offsuit 10. I'm curious, what are your thoughts in terms of some of the check raisables, maybe a King 9 suited, King 8 suited, Jack 10, Jack 9 suited? I mean, all of these potentially shoved pre along with King Jack O, but if they defended, do you see them in his call range if he doesn't check raise, or do you see him folding to B33?
On the flop?
Yeah.
I mean, no backdoor, he should fold.
Fold King Jack O, no backdoor?
Yeah, he should.
And what do you think with like a Jack 9 suited backdoor?
I mean, maybe also sharpening a little bit. I'm actually leaning now more to even a slightly tighter approach for me on the button. Like, I think it's really a spot where what I described in the beginning, I think that effect is maybe even stronger, where we might only see bet 60% or so rather than even 80. Like, it's a spot where we should be checking a fair bit around hands like ace high and weaker queen X to defend, and then jacks and tens and even nines. And then, like, yes, we will bet sevens probably and just like give up at some point of check raise. Then we will bet queen 10 plus for value, maybe like queen 9, and then like queen 8 and lower, probably decent amount of checking. And if I look at that, it's probably a lower c-bet percentage than what I assumed. And so against B33, no, you shouldn't. There's just no real incentive to float like King Jack off. Like, probably King Jack backdoor, King Jack suited would be kind of the weakest hand, where you might even just find quite some check there.
Yep, microphone phone. Yeah. So what jumps out to me there is, and I hear this from world-class players all the time, and you don't hear it so much from people who are not, let's say top 200 players in the world. I asked you about the bottom of his float on the flop, and you took one moment and talked about properties, probably shouldn't, float without a backdoor, but then you quickly went back to your c-betting range. You went to the previous node and reanalyzed that to figure out the response. And I think a lot of people, they get stuck on the properties and they forget to analyze, well, it makes a huge difference if Fedor's betting range 80% or 60%. And of course, even before that, let's back up to pre-flop. I think, at final tables right there is kind of a really easy example for what's going on in the mind of a top pro when you're trying to dissect these spots.
And one thing actually that I think probably results in quite some mistakes on this board is I'm not opening that many Queen X offsuit. And I think that is fairly important. Like, this is a spot where I should play rather tight, and also the range shapes a little bit more into blocker heavy play, where like Queen 8 off not so good, and Ace Deuce off goes up in value. So this also matters for board structures like this, where we have a different range when we play chip EV spots compared to more payout heavy spots. So just something to think about here, where if we tighten up, we're just going to have more Ace X, King X relative to a chip EV spot, and just Queen 6-4 just becomes a slightly worse board than what we're used to, maybe.
That's a great point. I think at final tables, how much offsuit top pair do you have? It can't really be overstated. It's just, it runs the show on so many of these boards, particularly if it's not like a 5, 6, 7.
And I have some jams. That's also important. I also didn't mention that before, where like Queen Jack suited, I just open jam.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So next question, responding to the bet, you're going for a call here with the A7-0, but what looks attractive to raise for value? What's more straightforward, obvious? I can't just call this hand.
I mean, I don't think there's a lot of raising happening here. And if I raise, I probably, I do think in game I would raise a fair bit more than what I'm theoretically supposed to. Mm-hmm. But I think the raise percentage will be below 10%, like probably below 5%. Like, I think it's a spot you don't raise a lot. I think the reason why you don't raise the spot a lot is, yes, he will realize quite a lot of equity, and you want to push certain hands for value to make him pay for that equity, basically on a simply spoken level. But also there are quite some hands in this range that have you beat, and if you raise with your value, you're gonna get it in, and when you get it in, you're mostly behind. So let's say you have kings and you raise and he goes all in. Like, there is a fair amount of 2 pairs in his range, and he improved to some straights, and I think what's quite interesting, but obviously also we're going to get in the chips quite often on the river as well, so it's a bit, but the main point here, I think, is you can kind of coordinate and play the river in position. Like, I think that there's a lot of spots where you have the choice to see the river and decide how to play the river. Mm-hmm. So if the river is another card that again improves rather towards the hand that he's way more likely to have, such as 7x, 3x, like basically a 2, 3, 7, 8, you can still decide how to play those rivers. And I think the equity shifts will be pretty big. And so that's why I think calling frequency will be quite high, because a lot of your hands will have that option then to fold or play differently depending on what the river card is. Sure. And so if you raise, it's probably going to be not too thin, but obviously like Queen X will help to block some 2 pairs, block like Queen 5 and Queen 4 that he's not raising on the flop. So like if you have Queen Jack plus is probably a good start. And then kings and anything that's better than that. So kings and aces probably You call a fair amount of time and then decide river. And then anything that's better than that, 7-8, you will always call, I think, just because it's too strong. And if you have, like, I think the clearest raises are like anything that's better.
What about just shoving kings, aces, ace, queen, queen, jack? Do you think that's viable? Shove king 7 of clubs, king 8 of clubs?
Viable, yeah. I mean, it's quite a lot of chips, but it's definitely, I mean, I feel like it's slightly too many chips, but yeah, it's definitely viable. You can definitely shove. I
feel like I'm going to be lost with kings on a deuce river, on 8 river, a 6. I feel like against a good player, that's a tough spot. Yeah, I really don't know.
The good point is he will have to turn, like, basically he's rarely pulling bluffs out of like nothing, right? Like basically he doesn't have 7-9, or 8-9. It's not hands you continue on flops. So it's basically like he has to bluff something like like a donk a 4 on the turn and then turn it into a bluff on the river. Like that's the type of stuff you would have to see in a fair amount of frequency. So I think also the spot plays fairly straightforward, because I think that people just will mess up the river like massively, because I think they will kind of mostly just play their hand strength rather than like a sound strategy. And when you play against hand strength, it's generally just pretty easy to sort your hand strength accordingly. And
yeah, I think the toughest thing about these spots and studying them is for a lot of mid-stakes and low-stakes players, they might be facing, honestly, even some of the better players in their games play no donks on the turn in many situations. And your turn strategy and position is entirely different versus someone who might donk 60% of the time on the turn as opposed to 0%. And so kind of learning it from a solver is really painful if your opponent's not playing at all like they are.
I mean, this is definitely a spot where like I have not figured it out. Like this is very far away from having it figured out. I would actually say that your argument for shoving turn against that donk is pretty fair. Like if you have king queen, like kings, aces, I think a shove is actually a pretty nice option. I didn't consider it enough. I thought that it would be slightly too much, and it's probably leaning there, but actually against the equity that he has there, where there is a lot of pair plus gut shot or pair plus open ender, it's actually a great option. So I would actually probably retract that and say that I think shoving like a hand like kings is actually a pretty nice option.
All right, but you make the call with the ace 7. Seems pretty intuitive. When we definitely don't want to burn our equity and raise fold, and shoving does feel pretty dicey there. Deuce river. Anything Kevin can do other than check?
I don't think so. I mean, with this particular hand, like you win. That
still beating a lot of your holdings.
I mean, I think in these type of spots, like unless you know something particular, right? Like unless I think this is exactly. I mean, what do I do if I have ace 5 or king 5 suited, or I mean, right? It's just like, how am I going to play it? Am I going to always bluff river now? I mean, I would in game probably, but in theory you might not. So it's like generally if you have hands that have like 10% equity now, like 15 or 20, like where you win sometimes. I mean, you're not going to choose this as your bluff candidate when you have much worse hands to, like in this line where it's probably donking a fair bit on the turn. You have much worse stuff to pull from. Like any 5 or 4 is worse already. And then you probably also just have stuff like ace X, maybe like ace 7.
Maybe like a king 9 of clubs.
Something like that. Yeah, like probably more like, king 9 of clubs might be a hand to do that with.
Debatable how much of the king 9 suited, king 10 suited, king 8, king 7 are starting to look so attractive to check raise. But makes sense. So he does go for check.
Yeah, I think that. I wouldn't really say that there's much debate about that one.
And then again, I think your spot is really interesting. We look at the ace of clubs, and my first instinct is like, oh, don't bluff. But when you really look at the hand, how consequential is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think personally not so much. Like, I think he, like in this particular line, I mean, sharing might like maybe also not trying to make things too abstract. Like I think he basically always has exactly what he has. Like I think that there's very like, unless you really, because the thing is also like people study and then people get to certain points of understanding certain concepts, but the thing is also, when do your neurons fire, right?
Sure.
Like when you actually like, there's this thing, like it's very, very, very hard for your neurons to fire for a strategy, for a concept where it's not the most natural, like, or somewhat of a natural thing to do, right? But when you have a hand class that benefits, your check call flop, now turn improves your range, but also the sizing, it's B20, it's not B25, it's not B30, it's B20. So, and I think it was even slightly, it's like B17 or something. It's, so he bets 200K, he doesn't bet, 250, which maybe you're more inclined with certain other, like if you're bluffing, like, if he has king nine of clubs, maybe, he goes slightly bigger and shoves river, just like, I think there's certain inclinations, or like if he has value, he might be slightly more greedy. Like I feel just like there's certain things that come together where it's just so likely that he has exactly, 5-7, 6-7, 6-8, like 4-7 type of stuff, where it's like pair plus equity, where you don't want to get shoved on. You want to protect your hand on a turn. Like it's just a very intuitive donk on the turn.
Let me touch on one of those that you mentioned. You said getting greedy with value. And I feel like that's always my instinct after I donk the turn and it's clearly a board that favors me. But you have plenty of hands like Kevin has here that really serve almost no purpose as a bet, or a very, very thin bluff anyway. And it just feels like, hey, if I do have 7-8, if I do have 6-3 suited, if I do have 4-5 suited, I kind of want to always bet, but that can't be the strategy. Do you feel like that's a neglected portion by a lot of players? The donk turn and then check as a trap?
I mean, yeah, I would say that's definitely like a very strong suit of a few players, like really understanding where the range of your opponent is structured in a way where he will always bet anything that he can bet for value, and he will find certain bluffs. So when you bet for value, basically you just eliminate the bluffs and get called by the value. And I think that's one of those spots where I would probably bluff anything that I get here. That it's a bit tricky because he might he could value bet against a 5 or a 4, but that's a small part of my range.
Just working with the ace 4, ace 5, maybe king 5 suited, king 4 suited.
I don't mean the 6-8, but I mean, like, let's say he has, let's say he has queen 4, or let's say he has 7-8, or like you can value bet against a 4 or a 5, which might, like, I will check back those hands. So I think that's always kind of like, that should always be the train of thought, is like, what's in that intermediate range where you might get a call, but he will never value bet. And that's a very thin range on this board. So I think that it's quite, especially against me, where like I like to attack especially those type of ranges. So it's both from a theoretical standpoint and from an or particularly from an exploitative standpoint. I think trapping here would be a pretty damn good idea.
But even that exploit, it's a logic puzzle. When you get to the river, you're trying to unravel, because now you have maximum information. It doesn't take a genius to have eliminated at least 80% of your opponent's range to this point. And so you guys are working with these narrow ranges, and exploitatively, you're trying to say, hey, maybe Kevin way under checks a 3 or a 7-8 on the river. And that's where you're kind of narrowing the range even further. But I find what's really attractive about river play is there's nothing left. You have all the info you're going to have. There's no unintended consequences. I was betting for value, but then the flush came. It's really kind of suits a more logical mind at this point. So what does Fedor do?
Now this is interesting. I was thinking now what sizing, because I didn't remember exactly what sizing I bet, but I was
900 into what was this? Let me go back a little.
1.3, 1.5, yeah. 1.5, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
what do you think about your size?
60%. Like, I think in this particular spot, I think that value betting, I would probably value bet 7s plus.
Wow.
Yeah, probably. So.
And that's, again, the confidence that Kevin's not checking a big hand over to you, right?
I mean, I think it's like, the way the hand went, I was like, so now it's now a bit more like, okay, what's like, maybe, with that in mind, maybe all in is the best sizing. But I feel like I feel that this sizing is like like genuinely in the spots like this, when people have these type of ranges, I think that it's very nice to bet a sizing where you perceive value betting thinly as well. And I think that's very important there, is that in this side, like if let's say now I shove from a theoretical standpoint, you start to polarize much more, and then you start to have pretty strong hands and like certain bluffs that make sense. And then now maybe people are like, oh, like I have 6-7, I have 6-8, I'm blocking a certain part of his value range. Like now it becomes a decent catcher again. Like, so I think in this particular spot, it's nice to have two sizings, and I like this line here where I feel like I can just value bet thinly with anything basically that's beating a 6. And yeah, so that amount of value hands also gives me quite a lot of room for putting bluffs in there. And I feel like 60% it's like fine sizing there.
Makes sense. I think it's relatively obvious, but it can't be overstated also, is what you said about value betting thin. That's why you've got so many of, the best players in the world. And people say, this guy always bluffs, why don't you call him? It's because he bets thin so well. And that's, in this situation, if your read is correct and Kevin basically never has better than a 6, you just get to go ballistic with value. Even if he doesn't call you, it really, it sets that level of fear for people who watch this and say, yeah, I know Fedor's got all the bluffs here, but he's going to value bet.
I mean, that's the interesting part, right? Like, because the reason why you have to play careful against an optimal play or strategy here is because he's trapping a fair amount. Or like maybe you will see some B10 or whatever, and then like there's going to be like, I was actually thinking in like maybe there is some like very tiny bet size here with like 6-8 where you put this hand in sometimes because of the properties of it. But the main point I want to make is like, it's because they find traps and they find check raises, and then now if you feel like there's a certain line where your opponent is just capped and he doesn't trap enough, and so now suddenly if you can do that, what happens is you can widen your value range significantly. And when you can widen your value range, now actually you are allowed to bluff a ton, because if you can bet B60 and you just suddenly can value bet 7s, then it's like, oh, wait a second, like if I can value bet 7s, then I can bluff probably anything that, and then I'm allowed to do that, because if I can value bet 7s plus, then I probably just can't bluff anything that's not beating a 4 or whatever.
Yep. And the antithesis, it's so fun when you're, playing a low level opponent who's very nitty and you bluff catch their only bluff of the day. And it's just like, well, because you just don't have any value that plays like that. Like when you check the turn or whatnot. And it's like, you feel for them because they're just like, God, this is why I never bluff. But you're like, no, that's why you need to value bet.
Yeah.
So Kevin's got a thinker. Lays it down. And that's got to be real satisfying. I mean, this is a huge pickup. You and Watts were tied. That's just a big pickup.
Felt good, yeah.
2 mil to 3.3.
Yeah, that's a good feeling.
Yeah, don't get to execute too many massive bluffs for a large portion of your stack at final tables, especially when you're one of the shorter stacks.
I mean, also maybe a point to the bet size. Like, I think it's also, there's quite a strong inclination to leave some chips behind just because the value of those chips, especially if you value bet thin, like also again, this has maybe some impact on theoretical play, but like from a very practical side of things, it's just, I try to build a lot of strategies around bet sizes that leave chips behind. Just because the EV that you need to generate with the bet, like for example, going all in rather than like betting 3/4 of your stack or 60% of your stack or whatever, is like quite substantial. So like to outweigh that EV with a range you're constructing with your bet that stack has that you have left is actually quite difficult. So I try to do that or think about this as a lot.
And those ranges are only for bubble and final two tables, or this is even a chips thing?
No, that's later.
Ooh, doggy. All right. Nice. So you've taken on a bigger role with the security team with GG. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I think it was in January, and they asked me if I want to take more responsibility in regards to helping with security. And it's mostly focused on collusion, RTA, bots. So I'd say anything that has a strong poker background. So not there's like in security, there's obviously lots of topics with like fraud and so on, but it's heavily focused on the, let's say, the poker ecology area.
What will you be doing for them?
I mean, I think generally speaking, the main idea I have going into this role is to try to increase the EV of the poker ecology as much as possible and try to identify in these areas what the biggest threats are, and then help them with my expertise around and mostly working closely with the security team, because they have actually quite some capable people to just help them with input, because lots of things, especially when you dive deeper into, for example, collusion, it's a very difficult topic to approach from a technical perspective, as well as is how can you prove that, right? How can you detect that? And in that process, there's obviously a big technical challenge of building models that can create valuable output, but then also kind of subjectively observing that and seeing how can we optimize that. I would say this across all different aspects is one part, but then also there's a lot of information coming my way as well from people who are trying to support and help in some way. So also I see myself a little bit as a bridge between, for example, high stakes players, like who have certain representatives. So I talk to them and see how can we improve the ecosystem on that end. So that can be around, this is now not so much around RTA, bots, and collusion, but also there's been certain topics like straddling on the button, for example, which just creates just not a good environment, or seeding scripts, or they give tips on certain players, for example, to look into, and so it's basically a broad variety of different things. And then the last point that I see is also around communication. I mean, it's a hill to die on. It's a very it's, I'd say, a large. I got since February, I got a ton of negative comments on various social media platforms. But I still think that it is quite important to make things more transparent. But I've also come to realize that it's a very, very difficult challenge to navigate between. I can't sit on Twitter 6 hours a day and answer things, and there's certain things that came up like have been answered 25 times already. On the other hand, I also think that certain things just have not been communicated well, and that's frustrating for me, or like I find it sad as well, because I see like there's people who care and try to do a lot, and then they get in public, like the public perception is very negative, and that's obviously disheartening for them as well, because like it's not very nice to do a job like to be responsible for security and do your best, and then they pick out the one time that went shitty, and I understand that's the dynamic, but obviously I see the good things they do as well, so I also want to bridge that a little bit and make that more transparent.
The messaging, that's kind of where I get the most pessimistic, not because of you or the security council, but because of kind of the nature of the mob, which is any little infraction they want to kind of equate with, see, he was never good at poker, he's a cheater or whatnot. And I mean, there's degrees to this. I think just about everyone, I'm 37, and just about everyone who's been playing, for 16 plus years like I have, they were in a poker house where people commented on hands while you had a hand up. It was just like normal. Is that ghosting? Yeah, it's a form of ghosting, I think. I mean, if you're taking the input from someone else, and there's things that are unenforceable. And then, some of the things are maybe unenforceable like ghosting, and yet maybe the biggest pull from the ecosystem when you think about some of these stables and, inserting a high level player in for a $15 ABI player when they get into a high EV spot. But then on the other side, you've got the mob complaining where they say like, I don't play online poker because I get cheated. The cheating is maybe like 2% of your losses. You're opening 7-4 suited in the low jack. So it's like, I find it's almost, I mostly just don't comment on any of it because I don't think anyone really wants to speak logically. So I guess all I'm saying is I don't envy you. I don't know. It seems like a very difficult task.
I mean, the only it's not the communication why I do this. I mean, it also doesn't come with financial benefits for me. So it's not like, this is not like I have a lot to gain from this, because this is all, I mean, this is probably the most hurtful narrative for me, right? Like I sold myself out. Like now I'm, paid to shill whatever they're saying. The main reason why I do this is really because I mean, first of all, I kind of enjoy it. It's just there's certain parts about it that are just quite fun to have an impact on these decisions. But I really mostly see it for the impact that I see to weigh in on these decisions, where I really think they're just making the poker environment much better. And that's what I mostly see, where I'm like, hey, I can invest my time to try to make things better, and that affects then like all my friends and lots of acquaintances and lots of people that I don't know that then hopefully benefit from this in some way, even though it's not, you can't count it and they maybe don't know about it. Nevertheless, I feel like I kind of do, and that's the main reason why I do this.
Gotcha. Do you think we can get rid of hand to note and scale back this mass data stuff?
Man, that's a difficult question. Like this is I spent a lot of time on this topic. And one thing that I think is very important, a lot of people have not done like really in-depth work with MDA. So now you have a conversation with people who don't really know how it works. And that's already where like it gets difficult, because we use the word MDA and then people mix up different things, and it's
an umbrella.
So, yeah, it's an umbrella, but it's also like hand to node. The main thing about hand to node is it doesn't do MDA. It's just a really good tool, much, much better than Poker Tracker and Holder Manager. But you can do the exact same thing. I mean, the same process, at least, with any other tracking tool. So uploading hands, and that's kind of step one of it, is buying hands, right? Like hand mining and then selling those hands and then purchasing them. That's kind of step one. That's a big problem. I'm personally of the opinion that I think there's two worlds, right? You could say, okay, everything is allowed. Like you basically like do whatever you want. Like people can mine, like people can purchase. Like I personally am of the opinion that we have a better environment if that's not allowed, and if people can access their own hands. You can see any hand that you've played. You can do whatever you want with those hands, but not buy 500 million hands from like a third-party provider. That's my personal take on this. I think the reason why I think that is very clearly because it just supports organizations, and it doesn't really support. I don't think that it's at least not in my perception of the game itself, and I think it just drives the gap between pros and recreationals, and that's what I really don't like about it, is it kind of takes also away this mind versus mind aspect, where then people just create sheets and hand those, like basically these game plans to other players, and then
that's data analysts instead of poker players.
Yeah, not even. Like the people who execute analyze nothing. They just have basically a sheet of and just like, okay, there, yeah, I do this. So this part, I think, is just not good for the ecosystem. So hand to node is, the problem with hand to node is mostly it's just a very, very strong tool, and only very few people use it. And the people who use it, I mean, basically, I think that the absolute majority of them purchase hands and do in-depth mass database analysis.
Since we can't control the purchase of hands or even just the free exchange among stables or whatnot, why not just ban hand to node?
Hand to node is not banned because I think that when you think about policies, and that's also where I come from a different background. I'm a poker player. I'm not, now I'm more of a businessman, but this is obviously a massively different size or scale of operation as well. And I think that different people have different opinions, and I'm not actually the last decision maker here. I just give a lot of input, but I'm not the guy like saying, oh, we do this, we do that, we do this. I just weigh in on basically every topic that's being presented, share my opinion. And in this particular case, I'm more leaning towards hand to node being too predatory, and probably that I personally think that it should probably be banned rather than allowed. But the policy right now is that trackers are allowed as long as you can't use them on GG. And I understand the thinking there as well, because you can't use it on GG, right? So it would be enforcing to not be able to use hand to node on other sites, basically, which is also right. Like, do you not allow to use a program that people then use on other sites? Like that was another actually important part of the conversation. Like, do we not allow for it to be open, or do we only allow it, when, or not allow not being able to use it on GG? Like, there's so many little intricacies to this where it has actually a big impact, because then people are like, oh, but I used to use this HUD on this side, and obviously it takes away EV from regulars on playing on other sides and has no direct impact on GG because they don't use it there. So it's like, I think we ended up on a decent result where not so much has changed, because before it also wasn't possible, but just being very strict with, you're not allowed to use any software that influences gameplay at all. And I think that is the right path to take.
Yeah, I think what's tricky is when you have the conversation with all high rollers or people who are doing relatively well, you could get just about everyone to sign on for, like going backwards. And maybe even you could, I would love a world without HUDs. Just play, take your own notes and, see where you get. But the issue is there's a lot of people who, maybe they're making 30 grand a year playing in a stable in Brazil or Estonia or wherever. And like caring about the integrity of online poker is like, sure, that's nice, I guess, but I have 4 kids. Like, I'm kind of not that concerned with, Fedor Holz making, 5% less when he plays a GG 10K or they're not playing 10Ks, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of a luxury in some senses to care about this. I care greatly about it, but as long as that's happening, then there's a snowball effect. Then other people don't want to be cheated. They say, well, get with the program. In baseball, we have stealing signs, which I believe is technically illegal, but for the longest time, everyone did it. And once the technology got too good, then there was a huge backlash. And that's kind of where I feel we're at, is that no one is, strictly speaking, like exactly what the rules are is exactly how it should have always been, but it's gotten so far down the road. I tell you a weird story I had a couple of years ago. I played a final table with a really nice young man. It was here in Florida, and he was only 20 at the time. And we got coffee afterwards. He wanted to ask me some questions. He was thinking about going pro. And one of them that he asked me straight up, and I swear, super ethical, nice dude. I met his family, great kid. And he asks me, when I play online poker, should I use an RTA? And he meant essentially like, is this the better path to me getting better quicker, or should I rely more on my instincts because I won't have an RTA live? He genuinely didn't know that it was violating rules either ethically or against the actual rules of the poker sites. And I was thinking to myself, like, how many people are, there can't be that many, but it threw me like for a curve that to him, this was just like the new generation's HUD. Like, oh yeah, some people like a HUD, some people don't. Some people like to, have the solver output for the turn play, and some people like to just think about it themselves.
Yeah, I think that we should put as much effort into leveling the playing field as much as possible. I think also people really underestimate how big this topic is in terms of the topics they complain about or they talk about. And I think regulars and pros have to take more responsibility for that. You can't pawn off everything on the side and say like, you guys, you didn't do this well, you didn't do this. Like, I think you don't have poker player as a winning player. I mean, I love poker, but I think this notion that you deserve to be a winning player, that you deserve EV, that you deserve to, like that a side maximizes your EV, or that I think that is absolute bullshit. Like, I think it's the reason what I love about it so much is that it is the way it is, that it's not that there are like, that it's free basically, but then on the other side, it's like protecting that as well, that within that freedom, that it's ethical, and that rule, like that there's kind of the same rule set, because once like 2% break out, they ruin it for the other 98%. Because if there's 3,000 people as an organization, as like 20 different organizations, like basically as organized crime, siphoning like 20 million out of the system with like within a few years, like that hurts the ecosystem so much that it basically, that has the biggest impact on your win rate as an ethical player, not like what GG is doing. And that's really the thing, that as this in between a player and being now more on like looking behind the scenes as well. The thing that annoys me the most is I understand all the negative things, and a lot of things I can see where people are coming from, but GG is single-handedly pouring hundreds of millions into poker. There is things you can criticize, but in terms of online poker, basically everything else is dead or almost dead. There's like ACR, but I mean, like anything like stars, basically dead. Like 888, I mean, nothing like party. Like there's basically nothing else to play. So I see it more as like, they invest a ton of money into acquiring new players, like exactly what people are basically complaining about. And this balance between what regs are taking, what winning players are taking out of the ecosystem, and what you need to spend to bring a losing player or a regular player onto the site, there has to be some type of balance that it can grow. And when there's then a group where there's just like minus 20 million or like minus 50 million, that just might just like reduce the line to a degree where it's not worthwhile, or it's not worthwhile enough, or like we don't grow at the pace that we could grow, or like it takes away, like it reduces the V of the other 15% of reg. So it's like this that's why I think I'm so fired up about this topic, because like it's not only on the operate, like if you see, if you see someone who's like, everyone in Brazil knows, like everyone knows who the people, like why are you not?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. When you think about the financial collapse in 2008, the issue was essentially the regulators were controlled by the very people who are, the bad actors. And that's the issue here, is like, by no means should GG be the only voice in this, or the other operators. But we have this other issue, which is the cost benefit as a player to speak up is terrible, because you're just going to get shit on. Very few of us want to be Batman and want to just like, jump out in front of the firing squad and talk about like what the difference is and why this is a small infraction and that's a big infraction. I mean, I know Bonomo's done it before, and people are just like, you cheated 10 years ago. And people just, they just want to get angry and harangue people. I know, Foxen's maybe caught a little bit of flack when he called out Ali, like, even though, net good, but there's not many of our personalities that really want to jump out front. And then, so it's the journalists, but some of the journalists understand it. A lot of them don't. And it's not independent journalism. I mean, they're sponsored by poker sites, and it's not typically a career that is like, that is the end game of journalism. So, you've got a lot of people who I think could write really well about this and expose it if they were given the resources and the time, but that's just not really how, to my understanding, the poker journalism, really operates. I just don't know who's gonna, come to the rescue. You.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I'm after quite a lot. Like it's really not easy. It's not easy to find people to talk about it. I mean, like my expectation would be, or my I'm very strict on, I don't want to, just randomly ban people. Like I want to have, like a very solid case, and that requires a lot of information, and it's very hard to obtain that information, but it's also somewhat frustrating if you feel like there's a lot of people who have that information. So it's like, the other approach is obviously technically, right? To approach this technically and find solutions to get so strong technical proof that you have way more indications about this. The problem here is I cannot talk about basically anything of it because it's just preventing any type of progress.
It makes you feel better. I wouldn't understand it anyways.
It's understandable, but like it's quite a fascinating topic too, but not at the stage yet where it's making a lot of progress, but not proof enough yet. Before we move on to the next thing, I think one very important gist for me as well is I think we have to focus on solutions, not on problems. That's, I think, also a pitfall that I regularly fall into when I think about this, especially with what comes my way, that like basically everything is being pointed out that doesn't work or that's problematic. And also way back in the past where like, there was this thing like there at this point that wasn't great or that didn't work. And nevertheless, I think we're in a great position. Like I think there's lots of great opportunities on the horizon. And I think it's just, I think those topics are handled, like we can handle them. And I think we can find solutions. But I think, and I think that's what we need to focus on, is to just look forward and really look, okay, there's these different topics already in the last few months. I think there's progress that is being made, and there's things that are being improved and things that get better. And I think it's just like some of these topics are, they'll be forever, right? There will always be people trying to cheat, and then there will be like, they will be caught, and there will be new people trying to find new ways, and then there will be better systems and better detection. And I think it's, if I could give one message, I think it's really more around like anyone can have some influence, because if every reg like upholds a solid ethical standard and also holds the people around him to high standards, basically all things are solved. Because in the end, blaming the operator, there's people who are cheating. It's not like operators who enable people to cheat. It's like the people that are cheating. I think that's the point to start. And I think thinking in solutions, like a lot of people have people around them in some way or capacity that are maybe not doing great things. So like starting there, I think is a great way to start. And I do my best from my end.
Makes sense. I heard you talking once about exploring bad strategies that you know are bad, but you don't really know precisely why they're bad, and how that can kind of open up your mind to seeing things a little differently. You're smiling, I'm curious. But the thought I had was, like the guy who's the best 2-5 live player at the table, the guy who crushes live ABI 1500. He's got a lot of, we could call it good intuition or data on his player pool. But he's developed, whether he thinks of them as exploits or not, he has this exploitative strategy that does really well, in some cases, far better than people who are much more technically sound than him. Do you think that's a product of being around bad strategies so much that your mind naturally starts to kind of form around how to exploit this? And do you think there's any way, if that's true, to accelerate that process without having to put in, many tens of thousands of hands against lower level players?
I don't think it's a product of being around bad strategy. I think generally being around bad strategy leads to just bad strategy. But I think what the valuable part of it is really more the analytical side of things. So just kind of like taking it and then like looking at it and understanding it. And I think that's always been a bit of a differentiating factor where I remember a very strong dynamic where when I was playing online, it was just, oh, this guy is bad. Like this guy is bad. And that was it. Like I remember, particular, like there were 2-3 players that I thought were doing very well, and everyone was like, "Oh, this guy's shit,"
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, I didn't have a very strong gravitation towards that to say like, no, this guy does like this, so it must be bad. But I always had a little, well, what is he doing? For me, I think it's just the framing. It's less about, bad strategies, more about, I look at something, I'm like, why? Why does it happen? Why does he do that? Like, I want to get to a point where I'm like where I've played around so much with it that I feel like I understand the back and forth. And then once I've understood, it's also then not interesting anymore. But that's for me the part. So when I look at someone and I'm like, I remember there was one Brazilian rag back then online, and a lot of people in my circle were like, "Oh, this guy's bad." Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, "This guy's crushing. Like, he's printing money." And I was really looking into what he was doing, and this was one kickoff to like me just starting to play very, very wild in lots of spots. Like, I think I played 32-24 at some point or so. Just
Mm-hmm.
like finding the spot where like ace-4 off under the gun. Yep, I'll open, and I think through that I started to identify spots that other people wouldn't, because for some reason they thought like, oh, this is bad, because the chart on Poker Strategy said you're not supposed to open ace-9 off under a gun. So like the guy opening, like you get to showdown with ace-4 off, you're like, oh, this guy's an idiot. So I think I found a lot of value in just doing things and then seeing how they do, and like playing around with like toy games and calculating and seeing like, oh, what if, just like sometimes really like the most printing spots came just from like very basic, like back and forth. And I was just, okay, if he opens to 2 and there's like, there's like 4.5 in the pot, and I 3-bet to 5, and then he folds 62%. Like, I was like, oh, wait a second, like this seems like, and then I was just, okay, 4-7 suited, yeah, I mean, why not? Like 3-4 suited, sure. And then I think from this, like these very, like I see something, it inspires me, I take it, I play around with it, I optimize. Like that's why I like to look at bad strategies.
Yep. Do you remember DJK? I think it was 123, Dan Kelly.
I do.
I remember when I met him in person, he was going through a phase that was probably correct, where he, against the min, he would defend ATC from the big blind. And I remember seeing him defend 7-2 off. And yeah, I mean, people weren't c-betting enough. People weren't barreling the turn enough. Whether he fully understood or not, he, his intuition said, this price is too good. And it's interesting how those kinds of things, I mean, they still exist when you're playing against weak enough opponents. Although if you're on the stream, it's interesting, do you make the play because, it's good, but in a vacuum. So in Jeju, I was playing spike ball, which you are a very good spike ball player, but you didn't play with us.
I did play, but not with you.
Oh man, timing didn't work. Okay, fair. I played with Ole, and he's fantastic. I heard he's only been playing for a year and a half. He's an excellent player. But Ole told me that he was interrupted at the table when you were about to tell him a story. When you were 18 years old, you were forced to punch somebody in the face. I was floored. I wanted to know about this. I thought for sure if someone has punched somebody in the face, Ole was like near the top of my list. He's never. And Fedor, you were not near the top of my list.
I think the way we came up with it, we talked about street brawls, and then I asked Ole how many he's been in, and when he said 0, I was like, there's no, I mean, the guy seems like he's been in minimum 2-digit brawl. Like he just, I don't know. I think he would also kind of enjoy it. Like,
yeah, he's got a strong personality. I can see him like, a quick disagreement turns into let's do it.
But I think he's not that, he's not the aggressor, but I thought, he wouldn't back down if someone, he probably wouldn't, but like maybe also people don't try it. He's a scary guy. But the story, I mean, it was the only time too. It was basically, I was with a German guy. His name is Gut 888 or Guth. GUTH 888. He also played high stakes for some time, and we were very young. I was, I think, just 18, and we went to, so it was in Kufstein, which is in Austria, like was a live event. We went as a trip. It was really fun. We had a great time. It was one of my first live events too. It was just very, very, very good time. And then we went to a bar and we were 3 guys. And then there was basically one huge guy, 2 meters, like massive. And he went to the toilet. And then Good and me, I'm kind of the same size. And we went outside and we were quite drunk. And then there were 2 guys and a girl walking in front, and it was freezing cold. It was like, like -5 degrees.
Did you punch the girl?
Yeah, like 2 guys in front of us with a girl.
Yeah.
And she had like a net, like an like that was it. Like she had nothing. Basically like a net and a skirt. And it was basically like, it's pitch dark. It's like 4 a.m. and they're like maybe 10 meters in front of us. And we walk out of the bar and Martin, the good, he's basically like, he's commenting on her dress, like basically just like, and it was literally like, it's of course they heard it. And like, they turned around and they were just walking towards us. And I was like, what are we doing now? And then basically the guy approached me and I was just out of reflect, I thought like, okay, he's punched me now, and I was just like, okay, I just punched him, and his nose cracked. And then what happened, basically, it was a little bit of like I think he was a bit confused.
Yeah.
And then there was like stone. They were basically building the street, and then there were these stones you build like a street with, and they basically grabbed these stones, and I was like, okay, fuck.
Jesus.
And just him and me, we just started running. And then they threw these stones after us, like, and it just heard, like, I just heard to my left, where they like hit the floor and then slide for like 10, 20 meters. I was like, okay, and one of them hit Martin, and I think he has like had like a pretty bad bruise on his back.
So
but
the 2 meter guy never came out and defended you guys.
And that was the crazy thing. He was in the bathroom puking, and like while we were outside. Getting hunted, but yeah, basically he lost. It was unbelievable. He lost his jacket and his shoe while we were running away, and then we basically ran to the casino, and that was the story. So that was the only time I got into an
nice like, Fedor the Brawler
thing. Yeah, not really. Like that was the only time.
How many fights do you anticipate coming up?
I mean, it's one of those things where I don't want to be in one, but I would love to have a virtual situation just to know how it is,
I mean, VR is going to be amazing soon. We'll see.
Like, just out of like the adrenaline, and how would you react? And like when, with friends and you have to defend your friends, or you like, I'm just often asking myself, like, what if this guy just, I don't know, what do you do? Like,
yeah, you can only guess. You don't know how you're going to react to certain situations.
Especially,
and I mean, realistically, you probably don't have one reaction. It's what's firing at that time,
But also, especially in spots where, like, especially as a smaller guy, it's like often when you're like, okay, basically 80% of the spots you're in, you're like the weaker, you're the weaker, or like 90 even. So it's more like, okay, you have to like navigate that situation where you're at a disadvantage. So it's
disadvantage, but lower expectations can only go well.
Just strike first.
All right, Fedor, you ready for a round of fast fire questions?
Let's do it.
All right, put him in the hot seat. Name a high stakes poker player that you think is very underestimated by the viewing public.
Jans Arends.
All right, you're playing Werewolf, and you are a wolf with one partner. Which high stakes poker player would you like to be your wolf partner while you try and deceive the village?
Nikita Bajakowski.
What's something you think the high stakes poker world really undervalues, either on the felt or off the felt?
Life reads.
Who among high stakes professional poker players would have the best chance at acquiring a large following as a cult leader?
Justin Bonomo.
Give me a one-word summary of Ali Imsirovich's apology video.
Great question. dishonest.
Name a player that you feel is not a top 15 player currently, but you think has a very high chance of becoming a top 15 player 2 years from now.
Samuel Mullur.
Which high stakes pro would make the best high school guidance counselor?
You or Chewy Lichtenberger?
I'll definitely take Chewy over me. I think I'm
Wait,
above average.
wait, is counselor like that's like a mediator type of?
They kind of help you like decide what you want to do in life, whether you apply to this college. They also kind of run interference between you and a teacher when there are problems.
Chewy.
I had to go to the guidance counselor.
Chewy. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you'd be good at like, you'd be a good like guy to, I don't know, like you have you do so many things, you're so broad, like I feel like it would be when you're young, it would feel like you show someone a lot of different things to.
I'm the guy who keeps you from getting too good at anything. Just make sure you do a little bit of that, a little bit of that.
That's what you need in this. That's what you need in this time. Just try out a lot of things and.
Ready?
Yes.
We need a redemption round. That was we had a painful miscommunication, which happens sometimes. I think in person we would have done better. There's always those internet issues.
Yeah,
here's my fantastic shuffling. I got to not see the bottom card. We're good?
Yeah.
All right. Question number 1. You get to go back in time. You're not going to affect anything. You're just an observer. You're on the astral plane. And you get to observe one historical event, but it doesn't have to be like the assassination of this person. It could also be like, I get to watch the dinosaurs in the Jurassic period for 2 hours. Essentially, we're limiting you. It's not going to be like a day plus, but you get to, witness one thing for like, minimum 20 minutes all the way, a few hours. So 2 is whatever I would, barely the difference between doing this podcast with Jaffe and going back to that. It's pretty negligible. And ace is what you would most want to witness. So there's no bad answers here. Does that make sense?
Thanks for clarifying after.
There we go.
Disaster.
I'm paranoid. I don't.
Yeah, it's good you said it. Okay. All right. I would go back 1,200 years and watch how they harvest crop.
Okay. All right. Watch the serfs. All right. Question 2. You're picking a Triton player. All players in this example have 0 experience playing chess. For those that don't know, you are more than a proficient chess player. You take it relatively serious, right?
Yeah.
All right. They have 3 years to become a better chess player rating-wise than you are currently. They're starting from 0. Understand their life depends on it. So they are as motivated as this person can be motivated. Ace is who you think has the best chance to surpass you. 2, the least chance. We'll keep it to professionals only. They have to play poker as the primary income source.
Primary income source?
Well, yeah, poker. They're considered a pro. We'll put it that way.
Okay. By themselves or by others?
By themselves. We're going to say they consider themselves pro.
Okay. Sean Perry.
We're in 3 territory. I mean, that's a brain we don't know much about. It's a tough one to get inside. It's for someone who talks an awful lot. It's tough to know what's actually going on and firing. There's got to be worse historical events than watching them harvest the crops. But like, you didn't choose something again that would have been like extraordinarily painful for you to watch. Like, there are things that could have scarred you. Oh man, you could have gone back in time and watched your conception. That seems like a 2 for me. That seems pretty bad. 3. It's a 3.
It's a 4.
Oh, again. Man.
I mean, the 4 is tough because I feel like you tend to take a 3. Like, I mean, I felt with like the the chess one, it's so hard to differentiate between like a 6, a 5, and a 4.
Oh yeah,
and a 3. Like
those are the best.
A 2 is maybe like easier to pick, but like a 4, I feel like.
Yeah.
Who would you pick?
4s and queens are tough.
Who would you pick from the poker players?
Like it's going to be someone that I don't know too well, so I'm shooting little.
Steve
All right.
O'Dwyer.
What's that?
Steve O'Dwyer.
Steve O'Dwyer.
I think I'm maybe he is, but I would assume he's not so excited about chess. Maybe I'm wrong on this.
I mean, everyone, honestly, one of the strange parts of this is how much do you want to live? Like that's really what it comes down to. Everyone who really wants to live is super motivated. If you're a little jaded, it's like, he's really good at chess. Let's just enjoy these 3 years. Like, I don't know. I don't want to go out spending my time looking at grids. And
I think they basically all would live, by the way.
They're all what?
Everyone would make it.
Everyone would make it in 3 years? Okay. So we've got the stacks right here. Elton was chip leading 84, Danny 77, Dan up at 60. Alexander Shilikin, 48. You're at 39 with just Mario below you, 32, and JNT's got 26. So really deep stack final table, especially for a Triton. You can see this was the 200K invitational. You can see Ilkin Garibli gets 8th for 540. So this is a massive tournament.
Yep.
So Dan had 60. Raised it, cut off King 2 suited. Danny snap folds the ace 3-0. He's definitely shorter. Is that any mix at all for you or just easy fold?
I think pretty easy fold.
And you've got 9-4 of diamonds. So you do go for the defend. Is this close?
I don't really think so. When you get deeper, it becomes quite different. So like we are a bit under 40 big blinds now. I mean, after I paid ante 38 or 37 point something. And I think suited hands, basically you can probably defend anything. I mean, like there's the very bottom suited hands are close. And then in the offsuit range, you will maybe like offsuit 8s, like then some of the connected bottom, like you can defend fairly wide here to like slightly over min when you still like there's obviously payout implications, like you obviously want to adjust slightly, but I wouldn't adjust too crazy because it's not like 12 big blinds deep where you have to stack off like second pairs and stuff. You still can navigate quite a bit. You can select your hand strength on flops and turns. So I don't think that you need to make too tight adjustments here.
What if we tweak this? If we go online and you're looking at, maybe 5 of 73, so there's less antes in there and flatter payouts. Could it get close there or no?
It gets closer, but still, like, I'd still defend it.
Got it. Queen 7-3. You flop the flush draw. Dan bets just a drop under 33. What do you think about his situation? 60 big blinds into your little under 40. What percent of range do you think he ought to be betting?
Like range?
Got it.
I mean, from the cutoff, it changes slightly as well to the button that we had previously. You can open fairly, like relative to cutoff opens. You can open fairly wide here, like maybe a tad wider than chip EV. And nevertheless, I think since I am not defending like I'm defending tighter than chip EV for sure, and I leave out like lots of defense that are like in the offsuit range, which will lead to probably maybe 10% less defending or so. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this board you will go very high c bet frequency, and I personally would just range bet it.
So deep stack final table, you're not often playing 38 bigs, you know, especially as one of the shorter stacks. I'm always curious about check raise thresholds here, you know, what your queen jack, queen king is looking like, how often, you know, maybe a 7 mixes in, as compared with chips. Do you have an idea where you might have cut your thresholds in this situation?
I mean, queen jack, I mean, like I personally would not raise at a relevant frequency here. Like less than 50. Not like where I'd say, oh, queen jack, you always have to raise.
Sure.
Like I would play not a very wide raising range here. I think some pocket threes, sevens, queen 7, 7-3 suited, pure, and king queen, ace queen I also have here. So like ace queen basically pure, and king queen like quite often, and queen jack like not so often, and queen 10 basically never. Kind of like roughly around this. And then in terms of bluffs, it's just going to be a wild mix of low frequency, different stuff like 4-5, 5-6, 4-6, some flush draws, some pairs, like the best ones. So basically, I might raise some 7-5, 7-6 rarely here. I might raise some 3-4, 3-5, 3-6 suited rarely here. I might raise some like, I mean, king 5 of spades is maybe stretching it, but maybe, you know, like ace 5 of spades, I might, you know, not check call and just check raise it. So like these are type of candidates I'm thinking about.
So I feel like there's a few really naturally appealing candidates that you always have for chips here that just might not be in your defend range. You know, I'm thinking about the king of diamonds 4, king of diamonds 5, and king of diamonds 6. Do you think you were defending those in this situation?
I mean, king 4 for sure not.
Yeah.
Like,
it seems like 9 candidates that might just disappear, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part for sure. Like, yeah. I mean, it's probably just going to be like king 10, king of diamonds rather than.
That's what I'm wondering, if that now just jumps up in terms of frequency when you lose those other ones.
Yeah, sure. I think I missed a few. Like, I think I said the straight draws, backdoor flush draw, and then I missed the offsuit diamonds. Is like ace 5, ace of diamonds, very very nice candidate. Like king 10, king of diamonds, king jack, king of diamonds.
But then you're looking at also if some frequency of the ace 4, ace 5 possibly hit him with a 3-bet pre, so maybe we lose a quarter of those or something.
That's correct.
I just think it's an interesting puzzle trying to look these through. And then, you know, what it leads me to is often I'm thinking to myself, well, if we don't have those bluffs, are we replacing them with something else? Or is it just that our bluffs have come way down because, as you pointed out, the value threshold is tighter, but the defend threshold was tighter? Like, which is the most important in all of that? And do we want to have more equity? Like we just jack up our 7x check raises?
I mean, I don't think you have troubles finding bluffs, to be honest. I think the more difficult point is to find the right frequencies to be somewhat spread across different, like to just be decently, like not too heavily weighted towards one, where like you always have, you know, you check raise like 75% of your 4-5, 5-6, 4-6, because I am defending 4-5 off and 5-6 off. So like that's quite a lot, and that's I think the stuff to watch out for that I probably only raise like with a diamond. And so
if we're keeping this narrow size, or sorry, this narrow range, do you have an inclination towards a certain size
in terms of raising? Yeah, I mean, more leaning like I don't think this is a spot where it's going to be like too crazy. Like I think that, for example, like let's say you have pocket threes, like it's very different than whether you have 3-7 suited or threes, I would say. So there's probably incentive for two different sizings, but like I wouldn't be able to execute that and then split my bluff frequencies properly between those two sizings. So like I think I generally would probably go into like a between 50 and 75% pot. So like 3.5, 3.7, like, yeah, something along those lines.
I love the breakdown because you can kind of, you're articulating where there are patches of ignorance. I don't know exactly here, whatnot. And then you're trying to craft a practical strategy out of what you do know. And then just you're drawing on heuristics from other spots that you do know.
This is basically what where nobody like.
Exactly. And they come up constantly in final tables, especially deep stack. But, that's the thing is you have to have a good poker mind, not just, have memorized certain spots when you're talking about post-flop play.
This is a fair candidate to check raise as well, I'd say.
Makes sense. Do opt for call and turn a pair. Pretty welcome turn.
Yep.
So what do we think about Dan's spot here? We can see he barrels was 4 into 590. So this is just under or just over 66. You see this hand class a lot in solvers just go ballistic. He, I think Petrangelo calls it the bad boy corner.
This will sound weird to some players, but I would consider it fairly standard.
Yeah, I think that's a big difference maker at the super high stakes is that kind of everyone sees this. Just you've seen it so many times appear in solver with very little ambiguity. But when you are playing lower or mid stakes, both one less, maybe studied, but also maybe the call range from the big blind is tighter. So you're already walking into a stronger range. Not to say it's bad against, mid stakes players, but maybe in some cases producing a little bit less EV. You can also see the opposite.
Yeah. It's like if they defend very tight pre, they might have, just very condensed toward Queen X, and that can be the case. But generally speaking, like there will be enough 7X and 3X and like weaker flush draws that just have to surrender. So you get a decent risk reward.
So nothing to do but call here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Raise doesn't seem to accomplish much.
I would have preferred a 5 of diamonds or 5 of spades.
Those sound like nice cards.
Yeah.
Shooting a glance over. What do you got, Dan? I'm watching you. Now I want to see the river. Oh, not my river. No leads?
No. I don't have.
What do you think of Dan's spot?
With his particular hand or in general?
With this particular hand.
I think you have just one choice, basically.
Mm-hmm. What looks like a bluff you would give up in Dan's situation, aside from having paired your jack?
The most logical ones would probably be like weak diamonds, but even those go in. So even if you have 4, 5, 5, 6 of diamonds, you just fire, I think. So the thing here is I think you might be at a threshold where like there's not very much you will give up if you play properly.
Mm-hmm.
Because some stuff will get there and some stuff will check now because it improved. So from drawing from your pool where like you added some value dropped out because it can't value bet anymore. Like you might not be able to value, like kings is getting like close, but probably but like if you have king queen, you can't value bet anymore.
I think king's king of diamonds is like slightly better. Block king 10 of diamonds.
Yeah.
I can see it reversing too.
Not ace king, probably. Like maybe you give up ace king because you win sometimes. Like that's the only hand I can kind of think of that.
Makes sense. So let's talk about your spot here. You do face the shove. Pretty painful situation. 7 left.
I mean,
correct, and you're out.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, there's not really much to talk about. Like, practically, though, I just, this is one of those spots where I think if it's a 25K, I would probably always call. Like, I was so, like, in this moment already, like, sometimes, sometimes there's certain hands where I feel nothing, and then sometimes I start to feel things, like, way early already. It's not always right, like, by far not, but I feel it's like, I've placed a lot of bets in my career, like in terms of poker decisions on this. And like, this was one hand where I remember very vividly that I felt like something weird from the flop already. Mm-hmm. And I think especially on the turn, like very often I think it's like, this is one spot where I'm extremely sensitive to bet sizes. And I think this is one spot where I just lean to like, I mean, this is now talking a little bit out of my book, but it's very, very easy, like when you don't know exactly your strategy on the spot, right? You don't know exactly how you play like 38 BB effective, like after, like this board, c-bet turn, like second flush draw. You don't know if you play B60, B66, or B75 when, when SPR is whatever, like 1.8 or like, so, or more, 2 point something. So, right, like on the turn.
Oh, you're talking before he bets turn.
Yeah, like
SPR 2.
Yeah. So when SPR is 2, like you know what the geometrical bet size looks like, but it feels very easy. Like it's not that solver always wants to just bet geometrical, especially when there's certain. On certain board structures, it just leans to like kind of front load the bet size a little bit because there's like more equity. At least my explanation is that there's more change in equity possible. So you charge a little bit more on that street where there's actually hands with that can improve the stuff.
Yep.
And I think this is a good case where if you have kings, no spade, no diamond, it's just like, why do you want to bet, why do you want to bet B60? Or he bet like 400 into like 590. Like
I think it was 66.
Yeah, like so it was just one of these. This wasn't particular like, oh, he bet this side, but it was just like the culmination of different things where like already like I started feeling like, this something here feels off. And then I'm on the river, and it's like one of those rivers where I think when you're bluffing, I think it's just very easy to, like you're always going to bet this river, basically.
Yeah, you can feel confident. You're saying he's not going to be exuding much nerves in the situation. You just kind of know you're right.
No, but also you're like, now you have to, right? If like, let's say the river is a 7, you're like, okay, maybe you give up. But like,
makes sense.
This now is like, no, I got, like there's so much stuff getting, like, I just gotta, so it's like, it feels like it's not a spot where, it's a spot where I feel when he's bluffing, and let's say he has ace deuce or king deuce or like 5-6 of diamonds or 6-8 suited, like hands he probably shouldn't really bet on turn, but like,
yeah, cool.
In case he does have that, it just feels like, just feels like he's always going to bluff river. But yeah, sure. It was just one of those moments. Like not really much theory behind that. It's always always a fold on river, but it just felt like something was fishy.
Makes sense. And yeah, super tough spot. Like we said, Dan's situation seems clear, but he does execute. Does make the bet, and that's certainly when you find that turn barrel you're going to need to on that river. You did, I have this clip pared down, but you took some time banks there. You really wanted to call. You were talking about it. That was a pivotal pull.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, this clip doesn't reflect how.
No, you took a lot of time. We pared these down to under 90 seconds. Yeah. Tough spot. All right, Fedor, thank you so much for joining me. And final question. Can I get 3 recommendations? They could be books, music, movies, life hacks, anything. What do you think? Something I'd like or the audience would enjoy or benefit from?
One book I really liked was The Art of Learning. In case you haven't read it, just really, have you read it?
No, I have not.
Then otherwise I would have
by?
given you another one, but I really like it. I mean, it's about a chess player,
Okay.
but he turned into an incredible BJJ, like martial artist, basically. And he
Nice.
describes his journey of how he did that in an incredibly short time and became world champion, and kind of like just shocked because it's very Asian, like very heavily Asian. Basically every champion has been Asian, and then suddenly he just popped up, and he shares like just the art of learning, like how he approached it and how he learned. And I was fascinated by this, like from a chess player, like kind of a chess prodigy, into just this very physical world, and then just showing that it's really mostly like just learning techniques rather than just like, I loved it.
Awesome. That definitely sounds like something I'd like.
Yeah. I will give you a really weird recommendation now.
Love weird.
But I just watched a documentary. It's called Full Dance, I think. It's called Dance Life. So now,
okay.
It's called Dance Life, and it's a bit cheesy, but I loved it. Like I don't remember the last time I was so excited about a TV show. It's like 5 episodes, and it's basically following this Australian dance faculty, where like some fantastic young talent is going to, like after they've, or like during school or after school, like they quit school, go there, or like after school they go there. And it's just, I was just so fascinated by like how incredible they dance and like how they learn, and they follow them like over a year, and then just kind of their careers and their past. And it was just so nice. Like the choreography was just so incredible. Like really, it was better than some professional stuff I've seen, and I was so drawn to it. So I loved it.
All right, I'm gonna watch it. Got a final recommendation? Got music? Who's an artist or a song, even just a song you like?
Do you know Landon McNamara?
No, wait, not McNamara. Like, no, I was thinking Macklemore. Never mind, I don't know.
No, Time to Waste from Landon McNamara.
Excellent.
McNamara. I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, gotcha.
I think.
Excellent. Fedor's recommendations will be in the notes for anyone who wants to join me in indulging in those. And yeah, thank you again.
Broad. Like this doesn't reflect my musical.
All right. Yeah. It's just one song.
Yeah.
Thank you again. Appreciate your insights. The chat, it was fun. I won't make you sit through any more me talking nice about you. We'll put that at the front. And yeah, seriously, thank you.
You're welcome, Jaffe.
Really appreciate it.